hello everybody, and welcome to BAME Online Scholar. My name is Martha Awojobi. I use any pronouns, and I am the curator of BAME Online.
I'm Khadijah Diskin. I'm a PhD researcher and I work in JMB Consultancy as the resident scholar. Today, we're going to be tackling the concept of allyship. And what I usually do is give a very academic kind of background and history. Today with allyship, I find it quite challenging to do because the type of, I think, understandings of allyship and uses of allyship tend to be quite a kind of a social phenomena that's ever growing and ever flowing. So it's hard to perhaps in that instance really dismantle something in its historical context or try to use the political kind of positions. And instead, I thought it would be helpful to have more of an open flowing conversation where we can explore the histories of movement building and coalitions and types of organizing that had a diverse group of people kind of pushing forward a sort of project of justice, and how now we tend to think about allyship in that way, but it seems not to really fit. And I think allyship is something that's really interesting to me because I see it used in so many different ways. And today I'll be discussing the kind of ways that the concept of allyship, not necessarily the language, have been mobilized in really useful and effective ways and have been really meaningful for significant changes in the lives of oppressed people. But I also want us to think about what we're doing to the word allyship in this current moment, how it's become individualized, how it's become relatively passive, because we don't think of ourselves as inherently kind of involved within the structures of the world. We often see ourselves as, well, I'm straight, so, you know, hetero-cis patriarchy doesn't really affect me in the same way, so I can only be an ally to the queer community. Or I'm white, so, you know, white supremacy doesn't affect me in the same way, so I can only be an ally to anti-racist effort. And I think what's missing from a lot of those types of thinking, that detachment, is that actually the systems of white supremacist imperialistic patriarchy, to quote Bell Hooks, we adore, are disciplining all of us. Right? Like, we are all disciplined under these systems. The discipline may not look the same, but it's still a feature of all our lives that limits our lives and limits the possibilities for all of us to experience true freedom and emancipation. So to ever view yourself as just an ally to something is to miss the fact that even to be someone who is deemed within the matrix of the world to be relatively powerful or privileged, you're still being disciplined or still being used as a tool of disciplining. So we shouldn't think of ourselves as passively attached to movement. We should see ourselves as inherently involved in this cohesive project of emancipation, of building a new, brighter future, of imagining different possibilities.
And I think that's something that I see people starting to get to grips with a little bit more, that idea that just because you are white doesn't mean that you are not affected, conscripted, as you said, disciplined by white supremacy. Doesn't mean that white supremacy isn't harming you, but actually, if we think about it materially, there are hardly any benefits.
I'm glad you said that. I love when we talk about materially, and again, like, I think a lot of the systems that exist that structure our world are actually systems that are mythical in a sense, right? So the notion that white supremacy will grant a unilateral privilege to all white people at all times is a myth, and it's a myth meant to ideologically and within the kind of consciousness of white people make them think that they have more in common with people who are just as similarly oppressing them using different systems of class, different systems of hetero-cis patriarchy, et cetera, as having more in common with them. When we know that just because you're given the badge of whiteness doesn't mean your life is going to be great, and it doesn't mean that, you know, you're not going to be poor, it doesn't mean you're not going to face homophobia, it doesn't mean you're not going to face transphobia, et cetera, but because whiteness is this potent agency, it gives this myth that's necessarily what's going to happen. And I think that's why a lot of white people, when they think about anti-racism, think of themselves as, well, let me be an ally to it, instead of understanding, whoa, this system is affecting Black and brown people and giving them a concentration of a particular type of violence, but it's also conscripting me and fixing me and locating me into a particular place that also dismantles my ability to actually truly be emancipated. The entire project of white supremacy and its racial technologies is such that it fixes us to our skin color, to our morphology, and it fixes a bunch of assumptions, stereotypes, oftentimes negative histories and negative genealogies to who and what we are. And that limits the possibilities for us to truly imagine or think about ourselves as free.
Yeah, and I think that's really important. And I feel like, you know, so much of kind of the experience of like guilt that happens in white activist spaces is really linked to that idea that whiteness is that irredeemable fixed position. And actually I think that when you mix allyship with guilt, I find that to be like a really kind of murky place. Actually, I often find that when I see the word ally attached to a project, attached to a person on their bio, I immediately have a little like physiological response, right? Where my heart goes a little bit, where it like sinks and then beats faster at the same time, where I'm like, is this person really what they are saying that they are? For me, like, it makes me question the safety that I should be feeling around people. Have you got any thoughts on how, even just, let's talk about like 2020, the Twitter bios, right? When you started seeing ally here, ally there, like, how does that make you feel?
This speaks to the current moment in which we're in, right? Where a label or a word we view as doing enough of the work, right? And I think that's what the distrust comes from, where you had a bunch of people saying, I'm allied to this movement. And then you think, okay, you're an ally. So to be an ally means to commit oneself in a particular way to supporting the movement or to being invested in the movement or within the movement. And then you go to look at how far maybe they're involved in perhaps anti-racist work, and you see that there's nothing. So then allyship is not like an actual commitment. It doesn't actually show to us or prove to us active work being taken to aid in the sort of dismantling of oppressive systems. It instead becomes this kind of self-appointed badge of like, well, I'm a safe person to be around. And I think in the moment of 2020, what we needed wasn't people who just were safe. We didn't need safe spaces then. What we needed were people who were brave. What we needed were people who were committed. And it's really interesting because I've been in this sort of organizing space for a while in various different forms and with various different people. And none of the people who I know who are actively involved, and these can be people who are not necessarily Black, they can be white people who are actively involved in like Black power and Black movements, none of these people would call themselves an ally because they almost felt as though they didn't deserve that title. What they were more concerned with was actually putting in the work for dismantling oppressive systems. They're like, I'm not going to give myself a name or give myself a badge or reward myself with anything because the system is still so harmful. People are still being oppressed. The work isn't done. So how can I adorn myself with a badge like well done when the work is still continuing? And so for me, when people come to that question, how can I be a good ally? And I'm like, stop trying to be a good ally. Stop trying to be an ally. Stop trying to give yourself a title. Just start involving yourself directly in movements, involving yourself directly in communities that are being affected, and involving yourself in the work that needs to be done to make the world a better place. We shouldn't be so obsessed with wanting this badge of honor. We should be far more concerned with actually doing that work.
Yeah, I totally feel you. So much of white supremacy is like categorizing and labeling anyway, right? And I feel like actually, if you haven't done the work of understanding how white supremacy like categorizes us, of course you're going to create a category for yourself. And it's kind of like re-articulating the same dynamic that we are trying to dismantle. We're history buffs, me and you, and we like to talk about history. And I know that there's no kind of clear history of allyship, but based on your thoughts, your research, kind of give us your interpretation of kind of the history of allyship and how we ended up in the place that we're in today.
So I think that oftentimes, and because of the current moment, I think what's really interesting is the past was polarized in a particular way, but the present is polarized in a completely different and more significant way, because the past was polarized. We know racism was rampant. We know things like various civil rights eras had to happen. We know there were different kind of coalitions and movements like the Black Power movement, et cetera, that sought to undo racism. But I think in this current age, the problem is that we so clearly individualize anti-racist action. We view it as a kind of individual personal entity, whereas in the past there was more possibility for kind of coalitions and organizations, right? So if we think to like the Americas, for example, during the 1960s when the Black Power movements were in their kind of full swing, it wasn't necessarily, as we think about it, a solely kind of Black movement where it was just Black people fighting for their rights. Absolutely, the concentration was Black people fighting for their rights, but you had things like the Rainbow Coalition, you had things like Black Power, Yellow Peril, where, you know, Black people and Asian people were organizing based on their material context and trying to build a movement that was anti-imperialist. We also had movements that weren't just looking in the context of their nations, like America or Britain. They were looking at internationalist movements. They were looking at building coalitions with people from Africa, with people from India, with all these kind of former colonies, right? There was a much more substantial sense of emancipation as tied to community. And because it was tied to community, because at that time, it was the materiality of oppression that was the focal point. It was, how is this white supremacist imperialist machine messing with us all, not how is this white supremacist imperialistic machine affecting me as an individual person, which I think is really at the center of how we think about these movements now. We think about me and white supremacy. We think about me as an ally. What can I do? And that wasn't the kind of history of allyship of the past. The history of allyship from the past was people were tied to these larger communities, people were tied to these larger structures and movements. So to be an ally was to be directly involved. And we didn't even use the word ally so much. We talked about coalitions. We talked about kind of movements under a political banner. So for example, the British Black Panthers obviously organized around political Blackness, which we can critique for lots of different things. But at that time, it was tied to a larger community, a community that wasn't a community of the self. It was a community about actually shifting radical change. Whereas now we view the systems of the world and our engagement with the systems of the world as a personal kind of affront, as a personal kind of infliction. When we dismantle this and tie ourselves to movements, when you're working in the thick of community, you're not going to care about whether or not you're a good ally because you're so busy working towards a project with the people who are the heart and soul of the project. You already know that you're in the right place. You already know that you're doing the right things because you're led by something greater than yourself. You're led by something greater than a title. You're led by something greater than the sorts of wanting to feel good or wanting to absolve yourself of guilt. It's not about yourself anymore. It's about the larger system, the larger project. And I think that's where we can take a lot of lessons from history. But unfortunately, the age in which we live in is such an individualized age, is such an age of the self above all else, right? So we really need to think about how obsessed we are with our individual and personal feelings of being virtuous, of being morally good. Shed those types of assumptions, shed those types of needs, and really focus on, okay, what does the world need right now? What are these communities that are facing concentrations of violence? What are these communities that are oppressed? What do they need? How can I be directly involved in helping them, directly involved in giving up my time, giving up my labor to work towards that emancipatory goal? So for me, I think we really need to think about shifting away from the individualization of everything, shifting away from wanting to feel virtuous, wanting to feel like a good person, and actually just want to make the world better. That should be the primary goal.
Yeah, I totally feel you. And we've got so many people who are tuning in from the charity sector, and so much about the current way we think about allyship is, I think, just a re-articulation of the white savior complex, and that kind of seeing yourself as separate from these kind of social phenomena and this history, but also seeing yourself as the savior at the same time. And it's like the ally is like both kind of the victim and the savior at the same time. I guess for me, like if a white person is thinking about allyship, I think it's very important for them to realize that they're also racialized. Yeah. And I think that's like something that white people thinking that they're neutral, or that only people of color have race, but actually to spend some time together reflecting on being racialized as white, what that means, like what that the history of that is, and how you're conscripted into whiteness, and actually like do that before you start going into these spaces. And I think that for me, I mean, you would know, as a person of color, I know when a white person knows what whiteness means. And like usually they're not saying I'm an ally.
No, absolutely. Yeah. And it speaks to that thing of the way ally is used as, I'm going to support this movement even though I'm not affected by racism. And we're all affected by racism. If we think about the structures of the world as only affecting people who are oppressed, we miss their entire project. And this is why I say it's so important to think about systems of the world, to think about patriarchy, white supremacy, imperialism, or like heteropatriarchy, all of these systems as a disciplining mechanism. We are disciplined into these systems. We have different roles within these systems. We're affected differently by these systems, but they discipline us all, because that's how they've been able to last so long. That's why they have so much potency, because they discipline us and we discipline others. And we continue that legacy of socializing people into believing that this is the best and this is the only, and that the system that we live under is insurmountable, so can't be changed. But once we start to understand that actually we're disciplined, but there is the possibility for imagining a different world, for imagining a world where racialization isn't a tool of oppression and marginality, imagining a world where imperialism isn't a mechanism that exists anymore, then we can actually start to imagine and start to build differently. But so often we are so blind to the way we're disciplined into things like whiteness, disciplined into things like cis heteropatriarchy, disciplined into things like imperialism, that we just think they're just like the fact of the world. We just think that, oh, these things exist and will always exist, and this is just how the world is. But no, we're trained to acclimatize to a world that is like this. And in that training, we lose the ability to think that possibly something could be different. So we just carry on that mantle. We just keep going and keep going without looking clearly at the way the world is structured and the injustice that is at the heart of the world we live in, that we all desire freedom, but freedom is a contradiction when we are socialized into thinking that systems that are so inherently violent are part of the natural order. That is actually the antithesis of freedom.
I know there's more that we're going to talk about, but I want to bring Genelle on now to give us a little bit of a different perspective. Genelle, how are you doing?
I'm really well, thank you. This is so interesting. I'm almost not sure what there is more to add, because I've really enjoyed hearing what you both had to say. I'm here with half the sun on my face.
Oh, you look great. For those of us who do not know Genelle, tell us a little bit about yourself, what your background is, but also like why you were really keen to join a conversation about allyship.
Yeah, I'm a journalist by trade. So I was a journalist for over 13 years. I was reading the news. I've done digital journalism, worked for the BBC, ITV, ITN. I've also worked in the charity space as head of digital strategy. So I've done that for an international NGO trying to fight poverty all around the world, which I'm sure if you've worked in the NGO space, you'll be familiar with the rhetoric and things that go on in that space too. And then all of that basically led me to write a book. So I wrote a book called Communicate for Change, and it was all about how do we have better conversations around social justice issues and some of these very circular conversations, and you've both alluded to it, that we go around in circles about these things. And I was really interested in the communication piece, coming from a journalistic background, just all about telling stories. Again, even in the digital space and NGO, it's all about telling stories. I've worked with stories my whole career, and I thought there must be better stories than these to help us to get to somewhere else different. And I really chime with what you're saying, because what I was writing about was we have to reimagine what the future will be in order to get there, because we know a lot about what we don't want. We've been talking about what we don't want for decades, as you both mentioned. So actually, how do we begin to talk about what we do want? Because that's a more fruitful conversation. But also, how do we learn to be comfortable in disagreement? So disagreeing with respect, because I think we're never going to all sit down and sing Kumbaya and then the world's going to be better. I think we know that's not going to happen. But what I think we can get better at is conversations like this, where we begin to get on the same page and understand, okay, when you say allyship, what do you mean? This is what I believe it to be. When you say woke, what do you mean? This is what I believe it to be. And I think there's so many of these conversations that go on lots of different levels, because actually we don't even have a shared understanding to begin with. And I wanted to write about how people who feel they're on the right side of the argument often can be very moral, we can get very self-righteous, because we are
This is me.
I am right and you are wrong, and I will not be listening to your view, you wrong. And actually I think we have to get to a space where it's not about accepting other people's views, it's not about legitimizing them, it's not about saying they're okay. But I think when everything's on the table, we can move forward. I think a lot of conversations get driven underground, and underground, that's where the nefarious thinking really spins into a tail. And when that pops up, we see a lot of things as what we're seeing now, because I think a lot of what we're seeing is things driven underground. And on the flip side, because I love nuance, I hate when people say, you just can't say anything anymore. What do you want to say? Come on, let it out. What is it you want to say? So I think there's that flip side to it. And I I'm a big advocate of us finding that nuance somewhere in the middle of all of this and saying, you know what, it's complex, it's messy, it's going to be messy. If we really get into this conversation, some things about me are going to come out in the conversation that are unpleasant. Some things about you are going to come up in the conversation that's unpleasant. But when I see myself, not from guilt and shame, as you've mentioned before, but see myself as a flawed human being. So I am going to, some of the things I think are wrong, categorically, I can tell you, some of them will evolve, some of them are right, but seeing myself in that complex, messy way allows me to see you in that complex, messy way. And I think with that respect and a bit of grace and a bit of accountability in conversations, I think we're going to get much further. And also in my book, I did write a lot about allyship, because I think there's a lot in it, and especially from the communication point of view that happens when people start talking about allyship, that I think is very uncomfortable, makes me a bit slightly icky. And yeah, and that's why I was interested in talking with you two ladies today.
I just want
to fantastic introduction. Great.
I was just going to say, Martha, you kind of were like, oh, a different perspective, but I feel like we've agreed on pretty much everything. And part of exactly what I was saying was that we oftentimes get so stuck in ourselves and in our feelings, and oftentimes our assumptions of virtue and being on the morally superior ground, that we refuse to engage in very tough conversations. And that's exactly what we're seeing in this current moment, where a lot of people are like, I just don't want to deal with these people because I think I already know what they're going to say. Because they're white, they will never understand. And that doesn't push forward movement. It really doesn't. I think when we want to get to the point where we actually want to change things, unfortunately, the reality of it is that you're going to have to sit and work through things, and you're going to have to create a strategy that is actually going to be able to actualize that change. And if we don't have those conversations, if we are so stuck into the kind of wanting to be the most virtuous, wanting to be the most right, assuming that our experiences are the only validity, then we're never going to get there. And I think that's kind of part of the work that we've been doing together, Martha, and just trying to get people to understand that the unfortunate truth of the world is, if, as you say, we just focus on everything that's wrong and not what we actually want to build, not what we want to imagine, if we really do not allow for the possibilities of our radical imagination to flourish, then we are going to be stuck in these cycles. And we've seen it, right? Social justice movements have existed for centuries, and some have been able to really push forward radical change, and some have done nothing. And it's really sad, because genuinely in the last, 60 years, there hasn't really been a real significant movement that has been able to actualize change, and political change specifically, in the ways we've been able to do in the past. And in the past, the reason why things like colonialism and independence of various nations happen one after the other is because these people were in different nations with different contexts, with different colonial experiences of different races, but organizing and working together to understand how best to imagine a different possibility for all of them. And we've lost a lot of that, because like I say, we live in the age of the personal is the everything, right? People have taken the personal as the political and made something completely different out of it, and the personal is everything. Our personal individualized experiences are the totality of everything, and we want to be right, and we want to be virtuous, and we don't want to have tough conversations. We don't want our perspectives to be challenged, because we want to feel like we are good people. And unfortunately, that can't take us anywhere. I think that the problem with allyship as a term, especially in the way it's used in this current era, is that it very much blurs the line between an actual action organizing for change and a friend who is emotionally connected to a movement. So it's, are you an ally because I work with organizations that are working for emancipation, or I feel bad for Black people, I feel bad for gay people? And in this current moment, that line has been quite blurred.
The current allyship is a sympathetic or quote unquote empathetic feeling for a marginalized community. And I think you are bang on. That is where allyship currently is. I think the question every ally has to ask themselves is, who told you you're an ally? Did you tell yourself that, or has someone from that community called you an ally? Because if no one has called it to you and you are self-labeling, I could nearly there's probably a perfect Venn diagram between not being an ally and self-labeling. It's probably nearly a perfect circle. And it's not that everyone isn't, but I don't wake up in the morning and think, I'm going to be a good human today.
Yes, exactly.
And to me, allyship is just being a good human.
Exactly.
That really is understanding that we are all interconnected and treating life in that interconnected way. If someone in your workplace is being unfairly treated, you're not an ally because you speak up for them. That's just being a good person. You don't need a cookie for that. We should be doing that. That should be the bare minimum of our humanity, is to help other people in some way where you can and where you have influence and power, so forth. But yeah, I think that, to me, that probably is what current allyship is: sympathy.
Isn't it? Do you not think it's pity more than it's sympathy?
I've had that before. People saying to me, so it must have been really hard for you to get into journalism as a Black woman. Actually, got a master's degree in broadcast journalism. There was no favors, but the good thing was the newsroom knew my dad, and when I went there for work experience, they were like, great, you know your dad, we love your dad, and went for a job and did it all that way. But people never assume that's my story. They're going to assume I had to knock 100 doors, because it is pity. Because you look at me and you assign a story to my life that probably has nothing to do with me. And I think whenever I'm on committees and boards, they love and hate me. But one thing I said in one, we were getting into it about scholarships for Black people. And I just said, let's not conflate being Black with being poor. Because that's what allyship does, is it makes up the rest of the story. And I don't think we cannot, those two things are not automatically assumed together. So if you're going to be an ally, at least understand what you're aligning yourself with, what it is and what it is not, where there's privilege and where there's no privilege, because it's not that it's one blanket thing.
Well, that's exactly the thing I write about, and people don't know what race is. People think race is being Black, but actually no, that's just this color of your skin. Race is the application of the assumptions, the application of a whole set of stories and genealogies and histories based on our assumptions about a particular group onto a person. So what you're experiencing there when they attach those stories that are not yours is the process of racialization, right? Because this is what Blackness means to people. So every Black person must fit within this category and within this narrative. And again, I always say, like, we can't actually get to grips with understanding the way we all do these day-to-day racializations, these day-to-day assumptive allocations, until we actually start to have these conversations about what race even is and what its genealogy is. And in the context of, I think, allyship, I think it's a very disturbing position we're in now, right? Because we've already allocated that to be an ally in this current age is often to just propose a particular sympathy to a particular oppressed group. But even more than that, it's that blurring the line between action and just pity. But then additionally, the need to self-congratulate for having a sense of pity, because we view ourselves as, well, because I morally think racism is bad, that must mean that I'm morally a good person. And that's the badge of allyship that a lot of people like to carry around. That's the thing that they like about calling themselves an ally, is that it gives them this allocation of a moral superiority. It says, well, I'm not like those other white people because I view myself as better because I don't think these people should be treated badly. But am I committed to working within the world that I'm in to make sure people aren't treated badly? That's a bit too much for me.
Tell me you're an ally and tell me who your friends are, and I tell you whether you are or not. And I can 100% tell you that if you don't have any friends who are not your pet projects, and I think a lot of allyship can become like pet projects. And people say they're allies to Black people, but who do you trust with your children? Who would you tell your secrets to? Who would you ask advice from? Who at your workplace do you speak to? Who do you not speak to? Who do you allow to speak back to you and challenge your thinking? Who do you not allow to challenge your thinking? That will show me where your mindset truly is, because some people, it's very easy to be an ally on social media, but when the Black person in your team who's more junior comes to you and says, I don't think we should do things this way because of X, Y, Z, what do you then do with that person? Do you accept a challenge from them, or do you then push back because you feel that really your allyship white status gives you that superiority? You know the right way to do it. And in my book, one of the quotes I said is, why is it such a badge of honor saying that you treat everybody equally? If everyone's equal, why is it a badge of honor? In the sense of, if I think we are equal, I don't need to tell you, even Black people equally, why wouldn't you? If you think they're equal to you, it shouldn't be something that you need to highlight that you do. And I think the highlighting of it and what that communicates to me is that you don't think we're equal. And that's why you want a badge for treating me well. And I think that to me communicates a lot.
I wonder if it is a deflection from knowing that actually like you're not an ally at all. You're like, I must in front of people. But what this is really showing to me, like during this conversation, is that the allies have absolutely no idea what we're up against, because if they did, then they wouldn't be messing about with all of this nonsense. Actually,
on the brink of like ecological mass extinction that is going to affect people in the global south, people who are Black and brown, with a concentration of the effects of this. Like, we are really at the kind of knife's edge within the kind of world that we're at. And so I think for me, for now, I don't accept any allyship that is passive, and I don't accept allyship really as a term, because I want co-conspirators. I want people who are in the trenches with me. I want people who see themselves as not someone supporting me, but someone who is invested in the movement with me, right? I don't need support. I need people working with me. I need people in the fields with me. I need people who I know I can trust to attempt to imagine a different possibility and work towards making that happen. I think if we're going to sit and just congratulate ourselves and congratulate people for just being nice, or for just not thinking racist thoughts, we're really not going to get anywhere. I think this is crunch time, and we've seen, and I think that the thing that it's really frustrating now for me about the kind of discussions about allyship is that this isn't 2016 when the first kind of Black Lives Matter happened and we were starting to have these conversations or whatever. We are so inundated with information about the realities of oppression on various axes. We are inundated with the fact that people are literally going to die en masse because they're not going to be able to heat their homes, not going to be able to buy foods for their kids. Like, we are inundated with information about the inherent contradictions of the world we currently live in, the inherent violence of the world we currently live in, and its effects on people. We know this, right? You turn on the news every day now, and it's not even like the news is hiding things. We're being inundated with facts about the reality of the world right now. And so we need to actively do things, right? This is the time where we actively do things. It's not, oh, I don't know enough, I'm not sure, there isn't enough information. There is a wealth of information. We live in the age of information. There is a wealth of resources, and there is a wealth of people who have been for decades completely erased from narratives, erased from stories, who have been working towards building a better world, working towards making the world just a much better place, doing the work of imagining for us. And it's not good enough to not know now, right? It's not good enough to just want to be a good person but not actually change anything in your life. It's not enough at this point. So I think that if you are in the place where you're thinking about how to be a good ally, then maybe you're not actually committed to doing anything to change the world. You need to get to a place where you're like, I need to do something to change the world today. I need to work with someone to do something better for the world. You shouldn't be concerned with, how do I be good? How do I be nice? That's not the important thing today. It's, how do I feed people? How do I make sure that people have clothes, people have shelter? How do I make sure the community that I'm around is being looked after? How do I make sure that we survive what is coming in the next few years, which should terrify all of us, right? It should definitely terrify all of us, because we know, because of how racism structures the world, that there are people that are going to be facing the concentration of the worst things that are going to be happening. And maybe they are who we should be focused on. And maybe making sure they survive is the important thing, not thinking about how to be good at getting a badge.
Do we keep using allyship? Do we reclaim it? Where do you sit on this? You know, I'm always like dieted that allyship needs to just end. Genelle, what do you think?
I think so many of the things, terminology can move on, but if the premise of it doesn't change, then it will find a new word that makes us all feel better until we all get sick of the fact that nothing has changed apart from the word. I think we need a wholesale new conversation in this space that is framed in a more equitable way, which isn't about, to me, a lot of the chat about allyship maintains that band of I'm up here and you're down there, and actually they never actually come any closer together. It just stays at this like equidistant, because if you're the one always helping, that means you're like the one above, always helping someone else up. So I think there needs to be a reframing of how we think about, like you say, co-conspirators, collaborating, co-creating this new world together. We have to think about that differently. And I think actually it is about, one, those of us who people say they want to be allied with, holding people more accountable, being more direct, being more honest with our thoughts about what they're doing and not letting people off the hook in that sense. And in the other sense, people who are saying that they want to be allies, really thinking about what their actions are, because really it's about action and not about thinking, feeling, emotional, sympathy, pity, moving away from that and thinking, like Khadijah said, what have I done in my own space, in my own world to improve the life of people around me? Because that's where your biggest influence often is, and where I have my biggest influence. What actions am I taking? And not just actions that I'm taking for someone, but what am I collaborating with them to create in that space together? Not me telling them what they need, but us together working on what they say they need and what I can do, and we work on that in that way. And I think that kind of equity is a much better model and framework based in respect and mutual understanding and mutual equity.
So if someone wants to say, I'm an ally, they better explain it, yeah? Like, explain it to you.
Yeah, tell me what allyship you have done this week. And I would like to ask you that question, or for you to ask yourself that question. What have I done this week in my allyship? What have I done? Not what have I thought, not what have I felt, not what have I retweeted, not what have I shared on Instagram. Forget all that. The Black person that works at your workplace who's having hell with their manager, what have you done about that?
That's why I say co-conspirators, you know, like, you know, if the system is the system we're indoctrinated to do, then we need people who are conspiring with us to end it, essentially.
Can I ask you a question? What do you both think? Because sometimes even from our own communities, like people of colour saying we need our allies, that is something that I would also love to think about. How do we re-educate that thinking in our community?
That's something that's incredibly troubled me. And obviously within the sort of like Black Lives Matter movement, the thing that was really disgusting to me was, and I understand why they do it, people going, you need to speak up, you need to speak up, you need to speak up. If they ain't speaking up, they've told you enough.
Spoken.
They've told you enough.
Spoken very loudly.
And beyond that, it led to some of the most problematic, reactionary, performative declarations. I'm in a university and I saw university after university come out with these statements, and I'm just like I know every single Black person who's in your university, and they do not agree with any of this. But then more so too, it became, and I think this is a really critical thing we have to think about when we think about allyship and the performance of allyship, the performance of alignment to particular movements without actual kind of investment in changing the world. You had, during the Black Lives Matter movement, some of the most violent organizations like Fashion Nova, like Pretty Little Thing, who use sweatshop labor, right? Who literally actively, within the construction of their entire organizations, are part of the machinery that oppresses Black and brown people that don't live in the West, so we don't see them, but are in the sort of peripheries and in, you know, like places like Bangladesh, places like Ghana, et cetera, and you had all these organizations coming out and making statements in support for Black life, because you're telling them to, when they are the thing that is ending Black life, right? And they get a pass. And they get a pass, right?
They're getting clapped, like just getting a pass. They're getting clapped.
Like people are praising PLT, Boohoo, Misguided for having 25% off for Black lives, like stuff like that. When not a few months ago, they were literally paying people £3 an hour in sweatshops in Leicester. I don't want that endorsement. I don't want that allyship. And
it's like people don't know how serious it is. People that really don't understand like what's happening right in front of them. But to answer your question now, I used to work in fundraising, right? And we would do shit like this all the time. You can save this poor child. You, with your voice, with you coming and it's the same stuff that just creates that narrative of this white person being the savior of absolutely everything, or this ally, this person with more structural advantage being the salvation, right? And I don't really care about any of this allies, we need you, because like we all need each other anyway to get out of this mess.
I think it's really sad about the charity sector too, right? Because most people who come to it with that sense of saviorism, we have to be honest, right? I want to help people, I want to change the world, and I want to be a good person. We come with that attitude of greater morality and greater virtue, and we think that we're the ones who are going to solve the problems of the world because we care so much. But unfortunately, the structures that create, the technologies that create things like white supremacy, imperialism, cis heteropatriarchy, aren't concerned with moral postures. They aren't concerned with virtue. They aren't concerned with good or bad. As we see even in the current age, because we live under this sort of totalizing racial capitalist system, it will take on anything. right? PLT will take on pro-Black Lives Matter messaging because it's what sells in the moment. Pride has become a corporate affair where people who make bombs are all of a sudden pro-gay people, because it will literally transform itself in order to continue to make profit and in order to continue to sell us things. And we have to get to a stage where we stop moralizing and allowing people who are doing, and companies and organizations who, you know, are creating violence to be able to get these badges. And that's what allyship is. It's a badge, right? It mystifies and it obscures the reality of whether or not someone is doing something good or something bad with the allocation that they think good things.
Thank you so much, everybody who came to hear us have a little chat about allyship. I hope that your mind has been changed, your perspective has been strengthened, that you're going to go away and actually start doing your allyship rather than talking about it. Bye, everyone.